The political storm that is shaking the White House right now is one no one saw coming. With the 2024 election looming, tensions between the White House and key Republican leaders have reached a boiling point. But what triggered this sudden shift? What's driving the push for full retaliation, and what does it mean for our future? To understand this, we must look at the backdrop: ongoing partisan divides and economic struggles intensifying the stakes. The White House faces increasing pressure. Issues like inflation, immigration, and foreign policy have become flashpoints. Recent policy decisions and controversial moves have acted as the catalyst, sparking a backlash from Republican leadership. Leaders are calling for full retaliation. This implies aggressive oversight, potential legal actions, and blocking key legislation. We've seen this before. Historical precedents show how partisan retaliation can lead to deep political crises. This standoff tests our system of checks and balances. It challenges the very functionality of our government branches. The long-term consequences for American democracy could be significant, potentially weakening trust in our institutions. The opposition agenda focuses on accountability for perceived failures, alongside ideological goals like deregulation. Expect showdowns over spending and immigration reform. These legislative battles will directly impact the American people. This is all part of the broader strategy for 2024. Both sides are positioning themselves for the ultimate political contest. The White House will likely counter with moves to shore up support and deflect these attacks, shaping their own narrative. Media coverage plays a crucial role, influencing public perception and potentially clouding issues with partisan overtones. As the situation escalates, the question remains, what's next for America? We will be watching closely.
Provide an overview of the White House's current leadership and its relationship with Republican figures. Discuss key issues such as inflation, the handling of foreign relations, for example, Ukraine, immigration, or domestic policies like healthcare and the economy, which have contributed to the building tension. The catalyst for retaliation. What prompted the Republican leaders to push for retaliation? Was it a recent policy decision, an event, or a public statement from the White House? Highlight specific moments or controversial moves that have sparked the backlash. Republican leaders' position. Explain the stance of prominent Republican leaders, whether they are advocating for full retaliation in the form of legal action, policy reversal, or direct confrontation in Congress. Include names of key figures involved, e.g., Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, etc. Understanding. Full retaliation. What does full retaliation mean? Explore the concept of full retaliation within the political landscape. What are Republican leaders calling for exactly? This could include moves like impeachment, aggressive oversight of the White House, or a push to block key legislative initiatives. Potential strategies and tactics. Outline the different ways retaliation could manifest through legislative maneuvering, executive orders, or public campaigns. Discuss whether the Republicans are attempting to dismantle major White House policies or wage a war of attrition. Historical precedents. Draw comparisons to past moments in American history where partisan retaliation led to political crises, e.g., the Clinton impeachment, Watergate, or the Reagan-era Iran-Contra scandal. Analyze how these events unfolded and what they mean for today's political climate. The constitutional and political implications, the role of the branches of government. Revisit the balance of power in the U.S. government and how this current standoff challenges it. Explain how each branch, executive, legislative, and judicial, has been affected by the political conflict between the White House and Congress. Checks and balances. Explore how this crisis could test the system of checks and balances that America's founding fathers put in place. Could the Republican retaliation weaken the executive branch's power? Or could it lead to a gridlock that hinders the functionality of government? The future of American democracy. Discuss the long-term consequences for American democracy. Will partisan warfare weaken the country's global standing? How might this all affect trust in government institutions? The Republican agenda and the road ahead. What does the Republican Party want? Outline the Republican agenda in response to the White House's actions. Is it purely ideological, e.g., tax cuts, deregulation? Or is there a deeper desire to hold the White House accountable for past mistakes or perceived failures? Upcoming battles in Congress. provide a breakdown of key legislative battles on the horizon, including potential showdowns over spending, immigration reform, and other hot-button issues. Predict how these clashes will impact the American people and what might come of them. The Republican strategy for 2024. Analyze how this situation fits into the broader Republican strategy heading into the 2024 elections. Are they rallying the base, trying to reclaim power through legislative means, or positioning themselves as the antidote to a perceived flawed administration? The White House's response, the president's strategy. Discuss how the White House is likely to respond to Republican retaliation. What moves might the administration make to shore up support, deflect attacks, or counter the Republican strategy? Public perception and media influence. Examine how media coverage of the crisis is influencing public perception of both the White House and the Republican Party. How are the narratives being shaped? Is the media focusing on the right aspects of the crisis, or is it clouding the issue with partisan overtones? How will this affect Joe Biden's presidency? If the situation continues to escalate, what will it mean for President Biden's political future? Will it embolden his enemies or shift the public perception in his favor? What's next for America? The possibilities of resolution. The escalating political tensions between Republican leaders and the White House present a critical moment for America's democracy. As these tensions grow, the question on everyone's mind is, can Republican leaders and the White House find common ground, or are we heading towards an even deeper national divide? While the political system thrives on disagreement, this particular conflict seems to be pushing both sides into a corner. It's no longer just about passing bills or proposing policies. This is about the legitimacy of governance and the functionality of American institutions. So, what might we expect in the coming days or weeks? A bipartisan compromise. Though unlikely, one possibility for resolution would be a bipartisan compromise. In American politics, there are often moments of unexpected unity. While this situation appears to be a standoff with little room for negotiation, it is worth remembering that history has witnessed moments when partisan divide seemed insurmountable, but eventually both sides reached a deal. If both Republican and Democratic leaders can agree to a neutral mediator or commission, perhaps there could be a resolution to the crisis. For example, a compromise over critical issues like healthcare, defense spending, or tax reform could open the door for political rapprochement. This, however, would require significant sacrifices on both sides and a willingness to put country over party. The reality, however, is that such a compromise is unlikely in an era dominated by hyper-partisanship. Escalation and confrontation, on the other hand, the standoff might continue to escalate. With the White House digging in its heels and Republican leaders pushing for retaliation, the coming weeks could see an intensification of rhetoric, followed by legislative battles, executive orders, and potentially legal action. In this scenario, the Republican-controlled House could attempt to investigate the Biden administration more aggressively. Expect to see subpoenas, hearings, and attempts to dismantle key policies, especially those related to spending, foreign policy, or executive authority. With both parties unwilling to yield, gridlock could paralyze Washington further, deepening the crisis. Public backlash and reform. There is also the possibility that the public will demand reform. The American people, often weary of partisan bickering, could mobilize and demand that leaders address the issues that affect their daily lives, like healthcare, the economy, and national security, rather than pursuing political revenge. If this happens, the pressure on Congress and the White House could force both sides to seek a resolution in order to regain public trust. Public opinion could push both parties to act in a way that's less about political rivalry and more about solving real problems facing citizens. This could result in a temporary de-escalation, where the focus shifts from partisan retribution to bipartisan problem-solving. Constitutional crisis and institutional collapse. If the deadlock is not broken and both sides continue to dig in, there is the potential for a deeper constitutional crisis. As checks and balances are tested, the government's ability to function effectively could be undermined. In a worst-case scenario, the political institutions that Americans rely on to ensure a fair, functioning system of governance could start to crumble. This could include everything from judicial challenges to an executive branch that oversteps its bounds, or even Congress itself becoming paralyzed by partisan infighting. In this case, the country would face a deep political and institutional crisis, and the ability to achieve the kind of policy innovation that has historically been a hallmark of American democracy might disappear. This would have long-lasting consequences, not just for the current generation, but for future ones as well. What does this mean for the American people? For the average American, the unfolding political drama may seem distant and abstract, but in reality, it is already starting to affect their everyday lives. The political standoff in Washington, especially as both parties look to position themselves for the 2024 elections, can have wide-ranging consequences for the economy, social programs, and national security. Economic impact. As the conflict between the White House and Republican leaders escalates, the economic repercussions cannot be ignored. If both sides continue to block essential legislation, it could result in a government shutdown or a failure to pass necessary budgetary measures. This could lead to cuts in federal spending, delays in Social Security payments, and the suspension of essential government services. Moreover, the ongoing uncertainty in Washington could have ripple effects in the financial markets. Investors, wary of prolonged gridlock and potential executive overreach, may hesitate to invest in American companies, leading to a decline in stock prices. The financial volatility could hurt ordinary citizens' 401s, Ks, pension funds, and investment portfolios. The average American taxpayer could feel the pinch through increased taxes or diminished public services. For example, the push for tax cuts or tax reform by Republican leaders could reduce government revenue, making it more difficult to fund vital services like education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Conversely, if the White House digs in its heels and refuses to yield, it could lead to the creation of new programs or expansion of existing ones, putting a strain on federal coffers. Social programs at risk. Social programs such as Medicare, Social Security, and unemployment benefits could become the focal point of the battle. If the Republicans push to reduce the federal budget, these programs could face cuts or restructuring. Seniors and low-income families who rely on these programs would be the hardest hit, leading to widespread public dissatisfaction. On the flip side, if the White House pushes for the expansion of social safety nets without fiscal responsibility, it could lead to higher taxes or additional national debt, which could also create economic instability. Therefore, average citizens are stuck in a precarious situation, where any resolution could bring unintended consequences for their wallets and quality of life. National security and foreign policy. The national security apparatus could also be impacted. With ongoing political infighting, the government's ability to respond to international crises may be hampered. For instance, the U.S. might face challenges in handling foreign conflicts or negotiating trade deals if the government is bogged down in domestic conflicts. The U.S.'s influence on the global stage could diminish if it becomes consumed by internal strife. Trust in government. Perhaps the most profound effect of this political showdown on ordinary Americans is the erosion of trust in government institutions. A country that has long prided itself on checks and balances may begin to question whether those institutions are serving the people or serving their own political interests. If both parties continue to fight instead of governing, it could lead to a greater cynicism toward the political system, causing voter disengagement and apathy. The 2024 election, a turning point. The ongoing political battle will undoubtedly shape the 2024 election, and it may even become a defining issue for both the Republican and Democratic candidates. How both parties handle the current crisis will be scrutinized by voters and could very well determine the outcome of the election. Republicans' strategy for 2024. For the Republican Party, the fight against the White House could serve as a rallying cry to energize their base. By framing their opposition to President Biden as a battle for the soul of America, they can galvanize conservative voters. However, this strategy comes with risks. While it may fire up the Republican base, it could alienate moderate voters and independents who are tired of the partisan bickering and want leaders who focus on practical solutions rather than divisive rhetoric. If the Republicans push too hard on issues like impeachment or attempts to defund programs that benefit ordinary citizens, it could backfire, especially if it leads to the collapse of essential services. On the other hand, if they succeed in forcing significant policy changes, they might be able to secure their position heading into 2024. Democratic strategy for 2024. For the White House and the Democratic Party, this crisis presents an opportunity to rally around the president and frame the Republican leadership as obstructing progress. Biden and the Democrats could present themselves as the defenders of stability, focusing on their legislative victories like infrastructure spending, healthcare expansion, or climate change initiatives. However, this strategy also carries risks. If the White House is unable to effectively navigate the political standoff and appears weak or ineffective, it could lead to a loss of public confidence. Additionally, if economic conditions worsen due to the political gridlock, it could hurt the Democrats, especially in swing states where economic issues are top concerns. Ultimately, both parties will need to navigate this delicate situation carefully. The events of the coming months will shape the tone of the 2024 elections, and the party that can present a clear, compelling vision for the future will likely emerge victorious. Final thoughts. As we close this chapter in America's ongoing political drama, one thing is clear: what happens next will shape the future of the country. Whether we emerge from this crisis more unified or further divided will depend on the actions of leaders in both parties. But for now, the real question remains: what's the next move for America? For the American people, this is a time for reflection. In the coming weeks and months, it will be crucial to stay informed, engage with the issues at hand, and continue to hold leaders accountable. The decisions made in this moment will have far-reaching consequences, not just for the next election, but for the future of American democracy. As we wrap up today's analysis, it's more important than ever that we stay informed and engaged. History is being made, and it's up to each of us to make sure we understand the full scope of what's happening. Whether you're for or against the current administration, whether you're